Okay. We're back. And again, it's early in the morning for me, but I had to get up and do this. I've got a sore throat, so I am chewing on halls just before I even get started with this. And we're going to start off with a game that I'm very worried about. The Boston Bruins got shelled last night. So they're 0-1, and they got 0 goals last night. They're in against Buffalo tonight. Buffalo finished 25, 45, and 12 last year. Buffalo made some additions. Hutton's playing in net tonight. He's one of the new additions. All the new additions are in green. Do not include rookies. Skinner, Sobotka, Sherry may or may not play. He's listed as in the lineup on a couple of different sites I looked at. However, when I looked up news on it, they said that had been pushed back, potentially. So, asterisks, because I don't think he's actually going to be in the lineup. Berglund, Thompson, as mentioned, Hutton, and Ely. Ely may be in the lineup, maybe an extra forward. It's going to be a very interesting game for this one, and I'm going to throw it there now for people who are curious. I won't actually be able to see most of the action tonight because we are going out to a concert. I have, these things happen. But I will be very interested to see what happens there because Boston's on the back end of a back-to-back. They got absolutely destroyed last night. And now they're going in against a Buffalo team that should be pretty excited about their future. And I don't think that bodes well for Boston. I don't. I have a funny feeling they could be 0-2 by the end of tonight. And they really need to get it together. I know it's early. But already last night I was going, uh-oh. Because here's part of the problem. Last year Boston finishes really strong. And everybody remembers that. But before finishing really strong last year, they did dig themselves into a bit of a hole in October. And Hudobin kind of saved them because Rask wasn't very good to start the year. I'm more worried with them having Halak as the backup than I was with Hudobin. Just an instinctive thing on my part where I'm like, I'm a little more worried, but we'll move on from that. But I have my eye on that game as a potential problem because if Boston loses that one in regulation as well, a bad start can sink your season. Look at Edmonton last year. Bad start can sink your season. Okay, the Islanders play in Carolina. Grice is probably the starter. Mrazek's been confirmed. Your new guys for the Islanders, Martin from Toronto, Komarov from Toronto, Filppula came over from Philly, Spiza from Vegas, and Leonard, who I'm mildly surprised that Leonard didn't win the starting job. However, preseason stats would indicate that Grice was the better goaltender. The Islanders, of course, finished 35, 37, and 10 last year. Very disappointing season for them. Being in against Carolina, and their new guys are Ferland, Martinook, DeHaan, Hamilton, the aforementioned Mrazek, and now McElhinney. They were 36, 35, and 11, and Carolina was equally disappointing. We expected more. I expected more to Carolina last year. I took them to make the playoffs last year. Oh, that was as wrong as you can get. But this is an interesting first matchup of the year for these two teams because I think we expected more out of both of them last year. They were both equally disappointing. And now we're going to be expecting more out of them this year. And honestly, I don't know. I think because Carolina's at home, Carolina would be the team I would favor in this matchup. But the Islanders had an excellent preseason. Can it carry over into the regular season at all? Probably. But Carolina had a good preseason, so it should be a very interesting matchup tonight between two teams that, on the surface, we may not find as compelling or as interesting as some of the other matchups on the board. But both teams are looking to bounce back from subpar seasons. Lou Lamoriello's putting his stamp on that team, and Tom Dundon seems to be putting his stamp on the Carolina Hurricanes via Don Waddell. So a GM with a really solid reputation and a GM that we remember what happened in Atlanta, so it's still kind of weird. The Capitals in Pittsburgh have a long history, and that'll continue tonight. The Capitals are on the back end of a back-to-back, but I would not be surprised to see Holtby still playing tonight because I think Holtby's going to play a lot of games. Backstrom had 3 assists last night. Kuznetsov 2 goals. They're the leaders of the team. Whereas Ovechkin, Oshie, and John Carlson had a goal and an assist each. So a lot of scoring. And now they're up against Matt Murray. Murray is going to be looking to bounce back from the playoffs he had last year against Washington. What better way to start than tonight? The Penguins ended up with a 47-29-6 record last year. And since last season, they've added Cullen is back. Ricola made their blue line. Jack Johnson will make his debut tonight. And Grant may or may not. Probably doesn't. But he's listed on the team, and he was not on the team at the end of last season. So we get a chance to get Pittsburgh, Washington out of the way early. So this is another tough challenge for the defending Stanley Cup champions. Yeah, that was supposed to be a tough challenge. So Caps fans are kind of over the moon, which is good because they're also angry at the same time over the Tom Wilson suspension. But it is what it is. And tonight they're in against the Penguins, and the Penguins will be looking to get off to a fast start as well. Because honestly, while we talk a lot about how it's a long season, it's 82 games. American Thanksgiving, once you reach that line, and these are the games to get you there. And American Thanksgiving, usually whoever's in the playoffs on that date will be in the playoffs at the end of the year, and teams that are struggling and far behind usually don't catch up. So you can't afford a slow start, Boston. I'm really, really genuinely concerned. All right. So I would expect Pittsburgh to come out pretty good tonight if the Capitals win both of these games. That's a nice way to start out your defense of your Stanley Cup. All right, next up, Chicago and Ottawa. So Cam Ward gets to make his debut tonight as a starter for a team that's not Carolina for the first time in his career. And he'll be up against Craig Anderson. Of course, the Hawks were a disappointment at 33-39-10. There is a timeline that may see Corey Crawford back in the net by the 18th, which is 2 weeks from today. The question then becomes, yes, but is this still going to be a starter Corey Crawford, or is this going to be a Corey Crawford who is not the same guy that he once was? When a guy's missed 10 months of hockey, I reserve judgment till I see him. Ottawa 26-43-11. New faces for Chicago. Chris Kunitz. Kruger's back. Not Freddy Krueger. When I say Kruger's back, I understand it's October and that may frighten people. Freddy Krueger's not a real person. He's in a movie. Brandon Manning makes his debut for Chicago. And, of course, Ward's playing his first game. And on the Ottawa side of things, Chris Tierney, Michael Bodker, and Dylan DeMello. 3 guys that San Jose, maybe they missed more last night than we thought. A 5-2 loss that they got against Anaheim. Kind of surprising. So, the Ottawa Senators looking to get off to a good start. They looked half decent in the last preseason game I saw them playing, but it was against Montreal, so I don't know how to read it. And again, since it's preseason, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt and say, well, good game, I guess. I guess we'll see where they're really at when the games become important. They become important tonight. And for Chicago, they have to show they can win without Crawford, is the deal with Chicago. Because the idea that Crawford would be the same guy, just come back like he hasn't missed a beat. That when a guy's 33 and he's missed almost a full year of hockey, that's a tough pill to swallow. It really is. So that's going to be an interesting matchup between two teams that missed the playoffs and are not favored to make it back this year either. Because Ottawa usually has a good year on the odd years. So 18-19 means it should be a good year. 17-18 was a bad one. 16-17 was an excellent one. 15-16 was a bad one. 14-15 was a good one. And we don't see any way right now that Ottawa could continue that trend, but why not? Trends are weird that way. All right. Columbus. 45-30-7 last year. Detroit 30-39-13. Korpisalo is starting for Columbus. That is concerning. Because he's not Bobrovsky, and I understand that Korpisalo is popular with the Columbus fan base, and I'm not going to say anything against that. but I don't put him in the same category as Bobrovsky. Howard is likely starting for Detroit unless Bernier somehow got that job from him. Riley Nash, Anthony Duclair, and Clendening have been added to the Columbus Blue Jackets. And on the Detroit side of things, Vanek and Bernier. Now, Columbus was 45-30-7 last year, and Detroit was 30-39-13. And the expectation is Detroit's going to get a lot worse. And what doesn't help is that Zadina, who was supposed to be ready, and I had anticipated Zadina would be very good for them, but he didn't make the team. And we look at last night. Kotkaniemi plays his first game in the NHL, gets an assist, and Montreal right now looks pretty smart at that draft table. We'll see how things work out for Detroit this year, because they went with a more veteran lineup in parts than I think we'd expected. But it's a matter of the Wings are trying to win. There doesn't seem to be any appetite for a tank here, even though they did finish with 30 wins. They just lost Zetterberg. They don't seem to have an appetite for a tank in order to try to get Hughes, even though Hughes would be perfectly what this team needs right now. Is that big number one center down the middle. They don't really have that. But they do have the benefit tonight that it is Korpisalo. It is not Bobrovsky. It is a home opener. Please fill the seats, Detroit. And I say that although the empty seats are very often corporate, or I would suspect bought by scalpers. The empty seats in Detroit really stand out too, because they're a bright red color. So it makes the arena look much more empty than what it probably really is. And again, as long as those seats are sold, the NHL doesn't really care whether or not people show up to fill them. If you buy your ticket and then you're like, I'm not going to go to that game. They already got the money for the ticket, so if you don't go, you don't go. It's not really they don't really care, because they already got the money for it. Next up, Nashville and the Rangers. So it's Rinne, it's Lundqvist, it's two goaltenders that you could argue are future Hall of Famers. Nashville coming off of a President's Trophy at 53-18-11. The Rangers coming off of a very disappointing season at 34-39-9. Ronaldo and Hamhuis are the additions to the Nashville Predators. And again, when I talk about the additions, I'm not talking about rookies in this one because I had limited space. I'm talking just about veteran players that switch teams. And, of course, McQuaid has been added to the Rangers. I don't think the Rangers are going to be playoff contenders this year, but I will say the roster isn't horrible. It's not a roster you can look at and go, well, there's no hope here. I think there is some hope if you're a Rangers fan. Unless, your hope is that you'll lose for Hughes. Then, yeah, you guys are... if you want to lose, then fine. I'll go ahead and tell you guys whatever you want to hear. Nashville fans, on the other hand, there's some unfinished business. And I would expect a laser-focused Nashville Predators team this year, because this may very well be the last year that Rinne is a top-level starter in the NHL. And I'm aware he got the Vezina last year. Perfectly fine, absolutely earned. But it was his first Vezina, and you have to ask yourself how many more years like that he can put together. So if you're a Nashville fan, tonight's game's kind of a nice test. And again, I don't want to overstress any one game and say this is key, this is a big game, but you don't want to get off to a bad start. You don't. And going into New York, Madison Square Garden, which would have been a scary proposition back in the mid-90s, is no longer a scary proposition. And Nashville needs to take full advantage of that, get Rinne off to a good start. And for Henrik Lundqvist, he probably won't play as many games this year as he has in the past. I would expect Georgiev to get every chance to play about 25-30 games this year. And we'll see what ends up happening there. You got two goaltenders who may very well be on the back nine, and one or the other could end up having a Vezina-level season. I would think it would be a fantastic story if Lundqvist did, but that's crazy talk. And we don't need any more of that. Winnipeg, with Hellebuck and a 52-20-10 record from last season, didn't feel the need to add any veterans from outside the organization. Nobody that made the team this year anyways. other than Laurent Brossoit. And that's perfectly understandable. They were right on the verge of that President's Trophy. And now they're expected to win a Stanley Cup. So what's strange with Winnipeg is that going into last season, most of us said, well, if they had a really solid goaltending, they're probably one of the better teams in the Central. But I don't know. They added Mason. I don't know if that's going to help. Well, here we are. And a year later, they're favored to win the Stanley Cup. And they're up against St. Louis, a team with Jake Allen's likely starting tonight. And Maroon, O'Reilly, Bozak, Perron, and Johnson as the backup have all been added to this team. St. Louis at 44, 32, and 6 last year, missed the playoffs by 1 point. And, you know, it was actually a pretty decent season for them. They did win 44 out of 82 games. They just couldn't win that 82nd game. They had a decent run towards the end of the year, just could not manage to overcome the Colorado Avalanche. So here we are with a team that's been retooled and seems primed and set to go. I like all the additions they made. I've been a big fan of guys like Bozak and Perron for a long time, and I think O'Reilly will really solidify them down the middle. I think they'll miss some of the guys they lost, yes, but I really like what St. Louis has done. So a good way to show that St. Louis is better would be taking out Winnipeg tonight. Get off to that good start. And this is, I don't know how strong a rivalry Winnipeg-St. Louis is going to be this year, but I think if Nashville fades at all, so let's just say Nashville doesn't have the kind of year they had last year and they end up falling in the standings, which could happen, this could be your battle for first right there. Could be St. Louis and Winnipeg. Easily. Absolutely. All right. Arizona and Dallas. Oh boy. This could be interesting. So you got Ronta and Bishop. Arizona, who were 29, 41, and 12 last year, but they were excellent February on. Against Dallas, 42, 32, and 8, who faded down the stretch. And that record was indicative of how solid they were in the first half of the season. They were not that solid in the second half of the season. Hinostroza, Grabner, and Osterley have been added to Arizona. I have discussed how much I like two of those three additions. But if Grabner can put up 20, 25 goals again, and I'm more concerned regarding his play when you look at how he played in New Jersey rather than how he played with the Rangers. I think he just had a fantastic run with the Rangers. If he gets off to a really slow or poor start, don't be surprised if a fading Rangers team says, hey, maybe we'll give him another shot. On the Dallas side of things, they've added Como, Polak, Carrick, and Hudobin. And Roman Polak, I don't know. I prefer Connor Carrick, to be honest. I would think that they'll switch out one of those guys as the number 6. This is something you have to watch, is when you're talking about another team. In this case, it was me talking about Toronto and their defensive depth. Is that the very players you're talking about may end up on your team. It's happened to me with the Canucks too. I remember Brad Isbister, and I wasn't enthralled with his game, and then he ended up being a Canuck, and I was like, oh, that's what I guess you could call poetic justice, or just, you know, just plain funny. But sometimes you end up with guys on your team that you haven't been happy seeing on other teams. For instance, there are going to be Nashville fans saying, why is Zach Ronaldo on our team? It's going to happen. But I will say this, Ronaldo, if he's cleaned up his game, and he does have that side of his game that's just really goonish, he can be useful on the fourth line. Much like Polak can be useful at times on the blue line. As long as Dallas doesn't overplay him, as long as they realize his limitations, they should be fine. But I have some concerns about Dallas. Many. To the point where I'll say I would take Arizona if I was taking any team between these two tonight. Arizona got off to a horrible start last year. I don't think they do that again this year. Minnesota's playing against Colorado. Dubnyk and Varlamov there. Varlamov's been confirmed. Your additions for Minnesota are Hendricks, JT Brown, Greg Pattern, and Eric Fear. Nothing mind-blowing of those additions. Those are all extras and guys who are there to be sandpaper. Calvert, Cole, Grubauer added for Colorado. That's more impressive. They had 2 members of the Blue Jackets and the goaltender from Washington. So both of their goaltenders came from Washington now. And Varlamov's the starter, but he will be looking over his shoulder this year because Grubauer is pretty solid. Minnesota was 45, 26, and 11 last year. Colorado 43, 30, and 9. This is why it's easy to project that potentially these teams switch spots this year, or Minnesota may drop further down. Minnesota won a grand total of 2 more games than Colorado last year. So the difference in the standings in the Central is always close. The Central is very, very competitive. And St. Louis is going to get better. There's not very many people picking Colorado to fall back, which they could. They absolutely could. If Nathan McKinnon can't follow up last season with another great season, they can absolutely fall back. And for Minnesota, they do have the pieces that they had last year. They can absolutely get back into the playoffs. But when you're picking a team that's going to fall out, there's certain teams that you may go, it's easier to predict those guys are going to fall out. And that's kind of where we're at with Minnesota. So it starts tonight, and Denver's gonna be loud, I would hope. Denver's attendance dropped pretty alarmingly last year, and that's likely, or not last year. It's been down the last few years really, but again, that's part and parcel to your team not being as good. I would expect that if the Canucks end up having a season of 20-25 wins, that they'll struggle at times at the gate as well. As part of having a poor team. That's why when people talk about move this team, move that team, and the team hasn't won anything in ages, I say let's just hold off. Not everybody's Toronto. Toronto's got this huge, massive market that you could have a team that loses all 82 games and people are still going to go. People would go intentionally just to see, can they win? Can they lose all 82? Come on. Toronto fans are just insane that way. Okay. Finally, last but not least, the thing to resistance. It is Philly. It is Vegas. This is the oddest of the matchups to start the season. Chicago and Ottawa is kind of weird, I guess, but Philly and Vegas is really downright strange. So they're starting Philly with a Western swing, and I think that's good. Philly was 42, 26, and 14 last year. Vegas, of course, famously 51, 24, and 7. Elliott starting for Philly. Elliott looked pretty good in the preseason. Fleury starting for Vegas. Appeared to be in mid-season form for Vegas. This may be a very low-scoring game. And people who watched these previews last year will know that if I say it's going to be a very low-scoring game, it's usually like 7-5. JVR is making his re-debut tonight for Philly. And Folan is likely the number 7 guy on the blue line. Probably doesn't play. On the Vegas side of things, Pacioretty, Stastny, and it looks like Holden's going to be the number 6 guy on the blue line for Vegas, which is an even trade out for Spiza. I don't think it's a big downgrade for them. Spiza only played like 30 games for them last year, and in the playoffs, you could argue that he was played when he probably shouldn't have been, and he might have caused a few goals against. And Vegas is looking to defend that Western crown. And honestly, Vegas has such a great atmosphere in that building. So many great things go on with Vegas, and I think we'll see that really starting to bleed over into the rest of the NHL. Even in jerseys. This third jersey from Carolina with the fun sleeves on it. Yeah, that heathered sleeve on this one. I don't think that happens without the Vegas jersey. San Jose as well. Fun sleeve pattern on that. Without Vegas, I don't think that happens. Vegas has changed the game. I know last night, watching some of the stuff with the Canucks, I'm like, those guys have drums with LEDs in them. There's little things I'm seeing, and I'm like, that seems kind of Vegas. We'll see how it plays out, but I think, honestly, Vegas should have another good season. I don't think they'll be as good as they were last season, because I think it's really hard to follow up a 109-point season with another 109-plus point season. But they should be a playoff team at the very least, and they're dangerous. And tonight they have a good test for their first game with Philly. That is, if Elliott is Elliott. He has been the best goalie in the league at times in his career. And then there are other times where he just looks lost. So we'll see where things are this year. Let me know your thoughts about tonight's games in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just tapped upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.